In July 1914, it was not the escalating diplomatic crisis in the Balkans, which would soon lead to the outbreak of the First World War, that was the main news story being covered in the French newspapers. Instead, it was a scandalous trial involving Henriette Caillaux, the wife of the former French Prime Minister, and the murder of one of France's most distinguished newspaper editors. The trial of Henriette Caillaux would become one of the most sensational trials in modern French history. So who was Henriette Caillaux, and how did she find herself in the dock in the summer of 1914? Henriette Renoir was born on the 5th of December 1874 at Rueil-Malmaison, an affluent suburb of Paris. Her father was Henri-Émile Renoir, an architect, and her mother was Marie-Sophie Augustine. She came from a wealthy family, with Henriette later describing herself as hailing from the French bourgeoisie. As a result, she received a good education and had a privileged and joyful upbringing. Henriette was lucky to live through a European golden age, as the Belle Époque was a period of optimism, regional peace, and economic prosperity. But would this luck continue into her later life? In 1894, when she was just 19, Henriette married Leo Clarity, a writer and literary critic. By modern standards, Henriette was very young, and the 12-year age gap is also noticeable, yet this was nothing out of the ordinary by the standards of the time. Sadly, the marriage was unhappy, and in time was filled with mutual infidelities on both sides. They had 2 children and would eventually divorce in 1908, but the reason behind this might not be what you expect. During the early 20th century, it was common for married couples not to divorce, even if they were estranged from each other. Henriette and her husband had remained married for 14 years, despite their miserable union, but Henriette's affair with one Joseph Caillaux had now become very serious. Born in 1863, Caillaux had trained as a lawyer before taking up a series of official positions in French Algiers in North Africa. After returning to France at the end of the 1890s, he embarked on a parliamentary career, quickly rising to the position of French finance minister in 1899, though this ended in 1902. In the mid-1900s, he returned to government as finance minister yet again. During that time, perhaps in 1907, he began an affair with Henriette. They quickly fell in love, and both were planning to leave their spouses in order to marry. Henriette easily acquired a divorce from her husband in 1908, but the same couldn't be said for Joseph. His first wife, Berthe, was reluctant to agree to it, and it would take 3 years to finalize the divorce. Finally, in 1911, Joseph got his divorce, upon which Henriette and he quickly married. Henriette would go on to state that she found the most complete happiness in her second marriage. The couple were also extremely wealthy, living in great comfort with plenty of staff, and had connections to many of France's leading figures. This was right around the time that Joseph entered office as the new Prime Minister of France. His term would be short though, as a diplomatic crisis with Germany over the colonial rule of Monaco led to sharp criticism of Caillaux, and he was forced to resign early in 1912. He remained a prominent politician though, and would serve several senior roles in various administrations throughout the 1910s. As a result, Henriette and he were never far from the front pages of the Parisian newspapers, as much on account of their extensive wealth as his political career. Henriette and Joseph's marital bliss would soon be interrupted, owing to Joseph's career and views. A few years prior, as Joseph was attempting to divorce his wife, Berthe, she had provided Gaston Calmette, the editor of Le Figaro, one of France's oldest and most respected publications, letters which had been written between Henriette and Joseph while they were still married. This began an intense campaign by Calmette to attack and discredit Joseph in the French press. This was all born out of Calmette's general opposition to Caillaux's political views and his ascent as Prime Minister of France in 1911. In particular, Calmette was appalled by how Caillaux had handled the Agadir crisis in Morocco, a region where France and Germany had been rivals for several years, and how he secretly negotiated with Germany without the knowledge of the French presidents. Even after Caillaux fell from power early in 1912, Calmette and Le Figaro continued to publish less than flattering articles and opinion pieces on Henriette's husband, according to some, 138 in less than 100 days. Much of it involved speculative pieces on the alleged corruption of Caillaux and his inner circle in government, as well as alleged manipulation of the Paris Stock Exchange. Other elements of accusations against Caillaux concern supposed attempts to undermine certain legislation that he was supporting in public, but then privately trying to sabotage in a two-faced political move. As the attacks escalated, Henriette became more and more perturbed, and was especially anxious that Calmette would release details of her and Joseph's affair from a few years ago. At this point, there was nothing to stop him, and he even had all the letters Joseph's ex-wife had given him. So, it wasn't long until Henriette began conspiring on how to silence him. Henriette had a few ideas about how she could get Calmette to stop with his incessant attacks on her husband. She believed the only way he could protect his reputation would be to challenge Calmette to a duel, but this could also destroy her and her husband's life. At this point, she didn't have a specific plan, but then Calmette took things too far. On the 13th of March, a letter was published by Le Figaro, which had been written back in 1907 or 1908 from Joseph to Henriette during his efforts to convince her to divorce her first husband. Henriette was shocked at this smear on her reputation and decided to take matters into her own hands. 3 days later, she visited a Parisian gun shop and tested a Browning handgun. Being satisfied that she could fire it with reasonable accuracy, she purchased it. She then set off for the offices of Le Figaro. When Henriette arrived at the office on the 16th of March, she requested to see Calmette, but was informed that he was out on business. She was told that he was due to return later that evening, and decided to wait for him. After nearly an hour, Calmette returned, and he accompanied Henriette into his office at around 6 p.m. that afternoon. A brief exchange followed, during which he asked him if he had any idea why she was there. Calmette responded saying that he didn't. Henriette, who was wearing a large fur coat, now pulled out the Browning pistol that she had purchased just hours earlier and fired 6 shots at point-blank range, aiming at Calmette's torso. 2 of the bullets missed. One scraped his cheek, and another was stopped by his wallet, but 2 hit Calmette. After hearing the gunshots, employees ran into the office and were horrified to see their editor lying on the ground. They quickly detained Henriette, who made no attempt to flee, and called for doctors and police. Before being rushed to the hospital, Calmette quietly murmured, "I did my duty. What I did without hatred." In the meantime, Henriette was arrested and questioned at the police station. Curiously, she refused to be transported by police, stating that her car was outside and she would meet them there. And funnily enough, the police agreed. When asked why she did this, she simply stated that she wanted to teach him a lesson and hoped not to have injured him too seriously. Sadly, even after being rushed to hospital and treated, Calmette died around 6 hours later from the damage caused by the bullets. Henriette was subsequently charged with Calmette's murder and was detained. The conditions in which Henriette was kept captive became a particular cause célèbre during the trial which followed. The Saint-Lazare prison where she was being held captive was a notorious facility in the early 20th century, where the conditions were deemed to be especially unpleasant, and many infamous criminal women you may have heard of were also held here, like Marguerite Stanil, Alice de Janse, and Mata Hari. It soon got out though that Mademoiselle Caillaux, the government minister's wife and former First Lady of France, was being given special treatment. For starters, her cell at Saint-Lazare was heated, an unusual thing for the prison. She was also allowed to have one of her maids attend on her in the prison, as well as being given special visitation rights, with Joseph even visiting in the evenings to have dinner with her. When news of this emerged, it caused something of an uproar in Paris, cementing perceptions that there was one law for the rich in France, and one for the poor. Despite the best efforts of the prison authorities to dampen such rumours, eventually they were forced to intervene, as a crowd began to convene outside the prison to protest, and fears of a prison mutiny grew. This never materialised though, and after around 4 months in prison, it was time for Henriette to go on trial. Henriette's trial began on the 20th of July 1914. There was a lot at stake. If convicted, she could potentially spend the rest of her life in prison, be deported to a French overseas colony like French Guiana, or worse of all, she could even face the death penalty. The extraordinary trial that followed would dominate the French headlines, even as Europe was hurtling towards war. It lasted just over a week, and the outcome shocked society. Throughout it, Henriette's legal team depicted her as a woman who was driven to act irrationally, owing to the smear campaign orchestrated by Calmette at Le Figaro. Through this, her lawyers tried to convince the court that Henriette had reduced culpability for her actions and that this wasn't a premeditated murder, but was an uncontrolled female reflex resulting from her strong emotions. In other words, a crime of passion. But the prosecution also had a solid case. Henriette was questioned and admitted shooting Calmette, which resulted in his death. The evidence that she was a killer was irrefutable. Public opinion on the trial was divided. The left believed Calmette's attacks had driven Madame Caillaux into temporary insanity, while the right viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who silenced a critic at her husband's request. Many high-profile figures made an appearance, and the French president even gave a deposition. The trial dominated French life, with nearly everyone keeping up with the drama and twists and turns of the case. 8 days after the trial began, the all-male jury had heard enough from both parties and proceeded to their final deliberation. 1 hour later, the jury returned a stunning verdict: not guilty. Thus, on the 28th of July, just over a week after proceedings began, Henriette walked free, having clearly murdered Calmette in cold blood. That same day, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Yet, it wasn't this declaration of war that filled the front pages. No, it was the verdict of Henriette's case, with many criticising the outcome, stating Joseph Caillaux had used his connections to influence the jury. How true this is we cannot be sure, but one reason the jury may have exonerated Henriette might have been that they perceived honour killings as somewhat more justifiable than cold-blooded murder, and in this case, they clearly perceived Mrs. Caillaux as acting to defend her reputation and honour. Anyhow, this wouldn't be the last scandal the couple were involved in. The date of the murder and trial and the wider political climate ensured that Henriette's actions became the subject of conspiracy theories at the time. Many viewed the trial as having been politically motivated and plausibly an effort to undermine the pro-German Joseph Caillaux within the country's politics in the run-up to the war. The timing was certainly peculiar. Even as news of Henriette's acquittal began to circulate around Paris on the 28th of July 1914, word also spread that the Austro-Hungarian government had declared war on Serbia, the first step in a series of actions which would see Europe's great powers declare war on each other. Exactly 6 days after the trial, on the 3rd of August 1914, Germany declared war on France. Yet, there is no concrete evidence to suggest that the incident was orchestrated to undermine Caillaux, and this remains a mere conspiracy theory. The end of the trial and Henriette's acquittal did not lead to the Caillots disappearing from the front pages of the French newspapers. In the course of the First World War, Joseph emerged as one of the leading proponents in the French Parliament of negotiating peace terms with the Germans to end the war and the devastation that was being inflicted on northeastern France. As leader of the Peace Party, he garnered the enmity of the French public, particularly so in 1917 and 1918, when the United States entered the war on the side of France and Britain, and fresh hostility to the Peace Party that Caillaux led now emerged, since victory in the war was imminent. He was eventually placed on trial for treason and convicted. Joseph was exiled from France for many years. There is some contrasting information that he and Henriette divorced, though the specifics of this are unclear, perhaps because they wished to keep it out of the newspapers after so many years of bad publicity. Henriette lived a relatively quiet later life, quiet in any event by the standards of the 1910s. She became an art critic, undertaking studies at the École de la Louvre, where she specialized in the work of the 19th century French sculptor Jules Dalot, publishing some commentaries and inventories on his work. Other than this, she lived a quiet but affluent life in Paris, dying there on the 29th of January 1943, aged 68, amid the Nazi occupation of the French capital. Joseph died nearly 2 years later, in November 1944. Several films and television series of her and Joseph's relationship and the infamous murder trial of 1914 have been made over the years. These include a silent film from 1918 and a German and French television film from 1964 and 1985 respectively. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Henriette Caillaux. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also be sure to leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.